Onto this, so Cosatu has joined the chorus of those criticizing the 49 Afrikaner refugees who jetted to the United States to start their new lives where they would be granted refugee status. Now, the Trade Union Federation says while South Africa faces a number of challenges, including crime, genocide and persecution, those are not one of them, right, or any of them. Cosatu's coordinator, Matthew Parks, joins me live now for more on this. Matthew, good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. So, to clarify what I meant in that intro, genocide, the persecution and that violence against particularly white people, saying that is not the challenges that South Africa is facing. Last night we saw those images of the 49 South Africans, and of course we've been using the words refugee in inverted commas, landing in Washington, D.C., greeted by Deputy Secretary of State Chris Landau, in the U.S. I mean, when you saw those images, what did you make of it?
No, good evening. Thanks for having us. Look, it's unfortunate. I don't think any country looks forward to seeing any of their citizens leaving the country, especially on unhappy terms. But look, you know, the history of humanity is one of migration. South Africa's DNA has many generations and strands of migration, forced and voluntary, from across the world. We had, refugees in the 1800s and 1700s fleeing persecution for religious reasons, the Huguenots leaving the Netherlands, France, and so forth. We had Jewish refugees coming to South Africa, fleeing pogroms in Europe. We had slaves coming to South Africa from Angola, Madagascar, Malaysia, Indonesia. We had indentured labor from India and China. So the history of humanity is one of migration. South Africans have, over many years, left South Africa to go to the US, to Europe, to Australia, more recently to the Gulf. So that's the nature of humanity. These 49 persons have the right to go, but they're not refugees. One may call oneself a pope, doesn't mean you are the pope. They're leaving South Africa because they want better economic opportunities in the US, because they're unhappy with democracy, whatever. That's the right. They have the right to say things which we don't agree with. But I think we can take it from no higher authority than the United Nations to say these are not refugees. Refugees are people fleeing violence like we've seen in Afghanistan or Sudan, fleeing economic poverty like we've seen in Zimbabwe, many other countries. But in a democratic South Africa, we are confident that with all of our many challenges, including high levels of crime, of poverty, of unemployment, of inequality, and so forth, there are no such things as South African refugees. But look, they have the right to go. These are economic migrants or migrants for whatever the issue might be. We wish them well. They remain South Africans unless they've renounced their citizenship, so they remain South Africans. We hope they'll find peace in their hearts in the US, but also they should represent South Africa well there because they are South Africans. And we hope that they would understand the US is not a perfect country, like South Africa's got issues. And we hope they also embrace the diversity, which is the US, and that we will see them coming back home to South Africa for the December holidays. To come see their family, their relatives, their grandparents, and so forth. And eventually, we hope they'll find peace and become a diaspora for South Africa, like the Chinese diaspora has become for China or India's diaspora. And hopefully, at some point in the stage, they will come back to South Africa, having addressed their frustrations.
Yeah. Today, and just in the previous hour, we were talking about the unemployment numbers in the country. And you talk about the various challenges that South Africa does very well face: poverty, inequality, and one of the big ones is unemployment. So when we look at these 49 South Africans who have traveled to the US, I mean, what do you make of the prospects that they will be able to find solutions to that problem if they are directly impacted? And if that's what they've gone there to look for, opportunity and greener pastures.
Look, the US is the most industrialized country in the world. People from across the world, from Europe, from Africa, all corners of the world have gone to the US for generations. So it's nothing new. The US is leave aside the genocide of Native Americans, which took place there originally. The US is a land of immigrants from across the world, so there's nothing unusual in that regard. People go there all the time, see greener pastures. But many people also come back. We think they might actually find that as difficult as life can be in South Africa, especially for working class people, including working class Afrikaners, it's not easy. they might find that the US is actually much more difficult for people who are working class. The cost of living there is extremely high. You find many reports of people in the US having 2 or 3 jobs to cope with the cost of living, people living off credit card debt. But again, look, those are challenges we can relate to in South Africa. But I think, look, it's their choice. That's their right. I think for us, what's key is to focus on addressing our challenges as a country. We can't celebrate a 43% unemployment rate, or that we remain 31 years into democracy, the most unequal society in the world. We can't also celebrate that the color of one's skin largely determines one's career prospects in South Africa, despite the many good things the government has done since 1994. So I think for us, it's about focusing on that. This is 49 South Africans, 3 million South Africans who are Afrikaans speaking, Afrikaners, and more who are also colored or African. Remain in South Africa, remain very passionate about South Africa. So I don't think we should allow this small blip in the news cycle to distract us from people who are overwhelmingly committed to South Africa. What's been one of the positive things of this year of flurry of fake news on social media, claiming all sorts of silly nonsense like white genocide, white land grabs, other fairy tales, that most Afrikaans South Africans, most Afrikaners have actually remained patriotic to South Africa and said, look, they don't agree with that nonsense. Yes, we have a noisy democracy. It's a little bit robust and chaotic at times. But I think most South Africans across the colour line have said, no, we remain loyal to South Africa and we'll resolve our issues and we're not going to get excited by geopolitical disturbances. And I think we've also been quite comforted by how the president, Cyril Ramaphosa, has managed this chaotic cycle with utmost dignity and humility. I think that gives us confidence that when he does go to meet with the US President Donald Trump, that he will lay in the foundation for a positive reset of our relations with the US in a manner which protects South Africa's hard-won sovereignty, our transformation journey, but also puts in place a reset which is going to lift our trade, our investment, our travel, our tourism relations with the US to new heights, but do it in a way, Naledi, which creates more jobs for South African workers, for workers across the African continent, and also for workers in the US as well. So it has to be a positive, mutually beneficial reset, but we are convinced it can be done despite a little bit of noise on social media and despite this year being quite an unusual year. But we're confident it can be done. And I think from our side as Cosatu, we're going to continue to work with the president, with colleagues in government, and with also our colleagues in business to achieve that positive reset.
Yeah, I do want to challenge what you said just a little bit here, Matthew, because I think, you know, it's all good and well. In the statement, you've got Cosatu, of course, writing how the struggle for this democracy saw not only the likes of Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, but also Uambeyes, Nordine, Bram Fisher, Ruth First, Dulcie September, and amongst countless other participating. And the point that you're making is that it was a non-racial struggle, but that was a pre-1994 struggle. Unfortunately, with inequality in the country right now, you do have a debate around what it looks like across racial lines and how policies are seemingly starting to divide that line even further, right? Where you do have a democratic alliance that is supported largely, some would argue, by white people, going all the way to the Constitution, to the courts, rather, apologies, to challenge the Employment Equity Act and wanting to do away with quotas, where we're debating broad-based economic empowerment, the expropriation issue at the heart of these 49 that have left the country. I mean, these are divisive policies, some would argue, that we still have not been able to tackle and bring everybody on board.
I would agree with you 100%. And I think we made a fundamental mistake at times to take our non-racial democracy for granted. I think at times we've just assumed that those people, for example, that I went to school with who are unashamedly racist, some who even joined the AVB, for example, who proudly joined the party's South African Defence Force, that they somehow disappeared. I think we've taken for granted the Springboks victory in 95, the Bafana victory in 96, those feel-good movements. Everybody endorses it, and clearly not. I think we've seen the flurry of social media. The people have been hiding quietly, and they've now come out in the open. And I think we've seen a lot of disreputable characters openly embracing racism in the most offensive way. And so I think one of the positive things, though, Naledi, is that you've seen the majority of society, the sober elements, the sober majority, actually standing quite firm, irrespective of whether we're ANC or other political parties, saying that actually we embrace our democracy. But yes, you're right, we can't take it for granted. And our critical fault line remains that the color of one's skin, one's gender, one's disability, where you live, has such a huge influence upon your career prospects, your educational opportunities. And unless we address that, we're sitting on a ticking time bomb. That 43% who's unemployed is overwhelmingly African and colored. It's women, it's people in rural areas and people in townships. If we don't address that in a serious manner, we're playing with fire. And so I think for us, that's where we differ with some of the political parties on like the Democratic Alliance and so forth, where they think we can just simply do away with some of our transformation policies like BE, or employment equity. We think that's a fundamental mistake. We're not saying that you mustn't adjust them. And I think we must have a thorough, honest discussion to say, has BE achieved what it meant to achieve? And I think often we'll say it hasn't achieved that. Has employment equity really broken the barriers to women, to African women, to colored women, for example? And it hasn't. So we do need to assess it, but the principles remain correct. And we can't be proud that 31 years into democracy, we remain the world's most unequal society. We're not saying that we expect miracles overnight, that we could somehow undo 3.5 centuries with a mere voting in 1994, etc. But we do need to really cherish this non-racial vision and make sure it actually happens. If you go to Cape Town, we should be asking ourselves, are we proud that you have your white suburbs, middle class, largely white, you go to your colored working class townships, gang-ridden, heavy levels of poverty, of inequality, and a similar an even more painful picture when you cross further into Guguletu to Philippine Kailicha.
Yeah.
That should be something which keeps us awake at night. So I think your point, Naledi, is 100% correct.
Okay. Before I let you go, I need to ask you this. You've got the presidential envoy, Mcebisi Jonas. I'm wondering at a time like this if he should be stepping forward, what kind of support he can and should be giving to the 49 that you, as Cosatu, in your statement have used the term the plane trek participants there, which is a clever play on words. But what he does with, if at all, with them, and Donald Trump then saying that South Africa will be sending a team to the US next week. What can that team say about the 49 and certainly why they're there when they do make their arrival in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, look, I think we have to give our support, full-hearted support to Mcebisi Jonas. I think he's a man of impeccable integrity, respected across the spectrum of South Africa. We have been having meetings with him as organized labor, as business, as government. We've been working closely with colleagues in the presidency, in DERCO, and DTIC. We're quite, hopeful with the president's recent phone call to the US president and the preparations for a meeting between the two presidents. I don't think you're going to resolve everything in that one meeting. It's too tight. The issues are quite complex on both sides. There's a lot of irritant points on both sides, not just in the US side, but also on both sides. But I think if the president can simply put in place a conversation, task relevant officials on both government side to work over the next 1 to 3 months to work on a reset package, which is mutually acceptable, which reinforces both sides' sovereignty, addresses points of irritation in a positive win-win way, and really takes trade relations to the next side. I think that can be a positive thing. Then you could have a reset report back to the two presidents within 3 months. And then I think once you beyond that reset moment, you then have to maintain, to invest in the relationship. I think that's been one mistake we've made collectively as South Africa since 1994, is that we have not invested in strategic relationships, whether it's with the US, whether it's with the UK or Germany or Russia or China or Japan, etc., or Brazil. But I think from our side, we're positive. I don't think you'll get a better salesman, better representative for South Africa than the President, Cyril Ramaphosa. I think he understands the issues. We have briefed him from our recent visit with colleagues in business to the US on the issues. We've briefed our colleagues in government. I think the issues are quite manageable. And I don't think you can achieve 100%, but I think as long as you have a discussion, you see how do you find each other, but at the same time to constantly respect South Africa's sovereignty and our own democratically chosen path of transformation, I think it can be done. We had difficulties even before Donald Trump's election as president last year with the Biden administration. We worked closely with government, with business over the previous 3 years to address those issues. We had managed to make significant progress. So the new administration, there's a new pivot, but I think it can be done. I don't think you've got much of a choice. Also, whilst we're maintaining our sovereignty, when you have the world's largest economy, our second largest trading partner, you have to manage issues. Just like Naledi, to be fair, we also have to manage our relation with China. We have to manage our relation with the European Union too. So these are strategic partners, and I think we can do so, and we have to do so.
Yeah. Incredibly important. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Matthew Parks, the Cosatu Parliamentary Coordinator.